one thing is coming up with the idea, which is great, which is really important. But there are lots of idea wallahs. And, how many people have ideas? Lots of people have ideas. When in my world of politics, everyone has the answers for everything, armchair politicians. How many of them are actually willing to go out there and do something about it? Not many. And the same with business. Lots of ideas, but it's putting it into action. Putting it into action is one thing. Sadly, 1/3 of businesses make it, 2/3 fail. So what is it to make it? And then when you make it, how are you going to grow it and make it into a sustainable business? South India, the only reason I put this slide up here is, how many of you from India here? Any from India? Okay. Right. You will recognize this person when I tell this story. 2 young boys, South India, Kerala. I was in Kerala last month. Beautiful state. Palm trees, coconuts, canals, sea, lush green, tropical, beautiful. Tip of India. Just like Cambridge. And so 2 young boys, remote village. One boy could get a place at the nearest school 6 miles away. The other boy, younger brother, couldn't get a place. He would follow his older brother to the school. They'd go inside the school hut. The older brother was allowed in. The younger brother would sit outside the window of his older brother's classroom in the school hut. And the older brother would pass the textbooks to him through the window. That young boy was so clever. He eventually obviously got into a school. Fast forward, he got a scholarship to the London School of Economics, got into the Indian Foreign Service, became an ambassador, and then became the first untouchable Dalit president of India. That's President Narayanan, who I had the pleasure and privilege of knowing. Think about it. From where he got to where he got to with all the odds stacked against him. And that story says that absolutely anything is possible in life. I'm going to put this up here as well because it's very, very relevant to what we're talking about here. We're talking about growing a business. But growing a business to what? Professor Clay Christensen taught me, I did a course at Harvard, and he taught me there, and in fact he's one of the greatest business thinkers in the world. And in this lecture that he gave, and he's written a book about it now, he came up with 2 messages. And the messages were very simple. One message, what is the purpose of your life? Think about it. How many of you have honestly thought about what is the purpose of my life? At the moment, the purpose is probably, was getting into Cambridge, and then it's doing well here, and then it's getting a job, starting a business. But what is the purpose of your life in general? Nobody asked me that question, by the way, when I was in your place. And the next thing related to that is, how will you measure your life? Just think of that while we're going through this talk. And think about that when I ask you this question. You all say you want to start your own business. Be honest here. There's nothing to do with impressing or not. Just give me an honest answer. How many of you want to start 1 or 2 person business, a small business? Any? Okay. How many of you would like to start a mid-market size business, employing 50 people, 100 people, whatever? And how many of you want to start giant multi-billion-dollar corporations? Come on, put those hands up. There's no winner or loser here. Look, there are hands that went up at every one of those questions I asked. So Professor Christensen's how will you measure your life, what is the purpose of your life, is very relevant to each of us individually. If you want to start a small business, that's your choice. If you want to start build it into a mid-sized business, well, you've got to grow into that. And if you want to start a really big business one day, that's a huge challenge in itself. But whether it's a small business, or whether it's a mid, or whether it's a large, you're going to have to grow that business. So from the idea to making that commitment to starting your business, to getting it off the ground, and then growing it, putting it into the context of your aspirations. So it is about aspiration, it's about inspiration and perspiration. That last bit, I'm sorry, no shortcut. It's really hard work. But the best part about it is when I look back to my early days when I started the business, there were just two of us. And, you know, it was fun. It was really hard work, but I have happy memories of those days. They were sort of a real struggle, but I do think back and have happy memories. In fact, just the other day, there's a new television series with Peter Jones, a dragon. He's a very tall chap, by the way. He's about this tall. I feel quite short compared with him. And he's got this new series called Peter Jones Meets. And he follows two entrepreneurs per program and contrasts them. And I wasn't told who my other entrepreneur was until after the filming was over. And I won't tell you, it'll be a surprise. It's going to be on air soon. But part of that film was taking me back to where I started Cobra. And when I went back to that front door on the Fulham Palace Road opposite Bishop's Park in London, all those memories came flooding back. But they were happy memories on the whole. So the goal, I think you've got to have a goal of where you want to get to, that mission. And I knew that very clearly right from the time I started, that I wanted to make the finest ever Indian beer, and I wanted to make it a global beer brand. My idea was a simple idea. It was a differentiation. I didn't invent something. I mean, there's some of you here, hopefully, who will invent something that never existed before. On the whole, businesses tend to be doing something differently and doing something better. And the extreme example of that is Facebook, which when it started 10 years ago, MySpace, social networking was already pretty prevalent and flying. He just came in and did it a different way, in a better way, and has just done it changed the marketplace forever with 1 billion people using it. In my own small way, I saw a niche because I loved beer, particularly when I was here as a student. And I got the idea for Cobra while I was at Cambridge. And I used to go to Indian restaurants. How many of you like Indian food here? Yeah, great. You know, I saw that spicy food, you want something cold and refreshing. People used to drink lager beer. The problem was the lagers that I was given were disgusting. They were fizzy and harsh and bland and bloating and gassy and just very difficult to drink. And then you put spicy food with that difficult to drink beer, it was very uncomfortable. And then I was introduced to ale. How many of you drink ale here? Real ale? Yeah? I love the stuff. But I found when I tried the ale with food, it didn't work. It was too heavy and too bitter. So then I thought, all these ale drinkers go into Indian restaurants and drink those awful lagers. And ale drinkers hate lagers anyway. And they can't drink their ale with the food because it doesn't go because it's too bitter and too heavy. Why don't I create a beer that has the refreshment of a lager and the smoothness of an ale combined? That goes really well with food. That has a globally appealing taste. That I can make into a global beer brand. What a simple idea. Why didn't somebody think of that before? And you've been tasting some Cobra now, so I'm not describing something that's not real. Very simple idea, difficult to put into practice. And with anything, it's the execution that is a challenge. High-speed rail network, you've heard about this high-speed rail network? Going past Cambridge, but going up to Birmingham and wherever. You know, do you know it's going to take 20 years to build? I said in a debate in the House of Lords the other day, I said, high-speed rail being delivered at slow speed. You know, it's the delivery, it's the execution. Now, the odds will always, always be stacked against you. There is no running away from this. There's a Harvard professor that describes entrepreneurship as achieving something when you don't have the means and leveraging off other people's resources that you don't have and making your idea work. It's making something happen with nothing. In my case, £20,000 of student debt from having too good a time here. Nowadays, unfortunately, student debt is a norm. Everyone thinks you don't stand a chance. My father was commander-in-chief of the Indian Army, Central Indian Army by that stage, 350,000 people under his command. I was developing Cobra Beer in Bangalore, and I'd go and visit him, and I knew I would never get money from him, because Indian Army officers got paid very badly. He used to joke and say, my salary barely pays for the mess bill. And he always said, I never had to dissuade my sons from joining the army. All I did was show them my paycheck. So I knew, no, I thought at least my father would give me some encouragement. What are you doing? All this education. Becoming an import-export walla. Get a proper job. So, you know, and they do that meaning well, not because they think you're a loser. You know, they do it because they don't want you to fail. They do it because they know businesses are risky. They want you to get a secure job. And they don't think you stand a chance. Another famous professor, Michael Porter, any of you studied the 5 forces analysis of market entry and the barriers to entry? Yeah, very real. I failed all 5 of those when I started Cobra. Again, if I could have afforded a management consultant, they would have said, don't even start. Don't even think of starting. Kingfisher, biggest Indian beer brand in India to this day. We're 5 times bigger than Kingfisher here now. But when we started, they had been here for 8 years. They were brewing in the UK for 5 years before we started. Carlsberg was in every single Indian restaurant. And marketing bucks, my gosh, those big beer brands. I mean, you know, they spend tens of millions of pounds a year on advertising. I couldn't even afford beer glasses when I started. Oh, well, and oh, by the way, I challenge you to name a household beer brand in this country now that's less than 50 years old. Household name. Except for Cobra. Yeah? Stella Artois, 14th century. So most beer brands are ancient. So all the odds stacked against you. But, you see, you've got to have a strategy. You can have all the odds stacked against you, but you've got to have some things going for you. Sometimes it's timing. Sometimes it's spotting a gap in the market and a market in the gap. So in my case, lager beer was growing in popularity compared with ales. And Cobra technically is a lager, although it tastes in between a lager and an ale. So I knew I was in a rising market. And then Indian food was getting more and more popular. A nation of curryholics. We're addicted to curry, emotionally and physically. So I thought, there we are. I've got 2 things going for me. Everything else can be against me, but I've got these 2 things going for me. And then, the most important thing you have going for you when you start your own business is the ability to do this. What I mean by this is, okay, you've got your idea, great. Lots of people have ideas. You make the commitment to start your business, great. But you know, in my case, I did all that, had my brand, but nobody knew who I was. Nobody knew my brand. You have 0 credibility. Why would anyone finance you? Why would anyone supply you? Why would anyone buy from you when you have 0 credibility? And they do those things if you have passion, faith, confidence, and belief in your idea and in yourself. That gives them the faith to trust you, to give you a chance. And the extreme example of this is when I developed the beer in Bangalore, brewed it, bottled it, it was ready to be shipped from Bangalore to the UK. And I didn't have the money to pay the brewery for the beer. And the owner of the brewery lent me the money to buy the beer from him. Because he had so much faith by then and so much trust in me as an individual and my partner that he believed in us and gave us that chance. And to this day, we don't deal with him anymore, haven't for many years. They are very, very close family friends. Okay, so we brewed in Bangalore, exported many, many containers, and the business started to grow. After the first 5 years, my partner decided to leave. Again, this is a story. When you start your business, most of you, how many of you already started your business? Few, okay. Of those hands that have just been put up, how many of you started with somebody else, with a partner? Great. Absolutely the norm. I could not have done it on my own without having started with Arjun. The first 5, 6 years, we lived together in the same premises. We worked together. We were with each other all the time. All the time. And we worked and worked and worked. And then one day, he said, I've had enough of this. I don't think this brand is going to take off. This is not for me, and I hate the weather in England. I'm going back to India. He went back to India. He's now in the States. On his own terms, I bought him out. He's very happy doing what he's doing now, and we're still very, very good friends. Most business partnerships don't last. Mark Zuckerberg, prime example. Bill Gates, didn't last. Richard Branson, didn't last. One person normally sees it through. Some partnerships do last, and I always envy those people who can carry on partnerships all the way through from the foundation right through. He left. The business took off the next year, not because he left. I was able to, so I made some good decisions. I raised some money because I then had 100% of the shares. I diluted down, raised some money, invested in a team, invested in some basic marketing like glasses. Still couldn't afford anything like television advertising. And then the brand took off. The plane started to take off. But then you start hitting the problems. The brewery couldn't cope with exporting hundreds of containers a year. And so we then had a problem with quality. So suddenly, oh my gosh, consumer product, very expensive, the most expensive Indian beer, and we started having quality problems and consistency problems and availability problems. And I asked my wholesalers, what do I do? They said, oh, if you start brewing under license in this country, like Carlsberg do, Budweiser do, everyone else does, you will be like everyone else. You are an authentic imported Indian beer. You'll be finished. In fact, we'll stop buying from you. So what do? Your customers, your wholesalers, distributors saying they're not going to buy from you if you brew here. You carry on importing from India, you're going to keep getting quality problems and consistency problems. The brewery can't cope anymore. Rock hard place. And I learned very, very early on that the most important person is the customer. The customer will give you the answers. And we said, okay, our wholesalers are saying this. Well, what does the actual consumer think about this? Does it really matter to them that we're imported from India? And when we did a survey with consumers and asked them, rank in order of importance the fact that it's an extra smooth, less gassy beer, or whether it's imported from India, whether it's a premium lager beer, or whether it's brewed to an authentic Indian recipe, you know what thousands of consumers told us the most important thing about the product was? The less gassy, extra smooth taste. And thousands of consumers told us the least important factor to them was imported from India. Great, I'm brewing here. And I made that decision, born in Bangalore, brewed in Bedford. Best decision I made. And today, Cobra Beer is brewed in Burstone-on-Trent, the home of British brewing. It's brewed in Belgium. It's brewed in India. And it will continue to be brewed around the world. And it's the taste that matters, actually not where it's brewed. So the slogan I have is to adapt or die during the journey. This is something you have to continually do. When we could start advertising, this is what we started with. It was done by Saatchi and Saatchi. This was our spokesperson, Dave, Curryholic Dave, not David Cameron, Curryholic Dave. And the beer from Bangalore that lets you eat more curry, the beer Curryholics adore, it lets them eat more, the less gassy, more classy Curryholics beer. And so it went. Very popular, did really, really well. And while this campaign was on, everything was flying. The brand was growing at about 70% year on year, 70% year on year. We got into the list of the fastest growing companies in Britain. I brought out a trade magazine for all the Indian restaurants. There wasn't a trade magazine for the restaurants, so I brought out a magazine. This was going out to all the Indian restaurants every month. We advertised in it, so we get our messages across the restaurants. Other beer brands were allowed to advertise in it, other products. And then suddenly one day, the editor of the magazine wrote an article that upset the restaurants. He said the service in Indian restaurants, he was trying to be helpful, but he said the service in Indian restaurants is so bad, the waiters look like, and I'm quoting him, miserable gits. The service is so bad because the waiters are not incentivized enough by the owners. So he took a swipe at the waiters, and he said, you know, service needs to be better. And he was trying to be constructive, but he did it in absolutely the wrong way. The restaurant industry was furious, completely understandably so. And the next thing, magazines of tandoori were being burnt. The editor received 10 death threats in one day. I mean, yeah, it was serious. I mean, it was very, very scary at the time. And then they realized, Karan Bilimoria, he's one of the owners of Tandoori magazine. He owns Cobra Beer. We'll boycott Cobra Beer. Overnight, we had a boycott. And the brand was boycotted by thousands of restaurants. A strike is a horrible thing to deal with when you're running a business, when you have problems, your own employees refuse to work. Very challenging. But when your own customers refuse to buy from you, is the worst. And when we at Cobra had done nothing wrong. We were completely innocent in this whole episode. Of course, the editor apologized. It took 1 year for that boycott to be lifted. And in that 1 year, we nearly lost the business because we'd opened up depots in Leeds and Manchester and Birmingham. We'd taken on hundreds of staff. We'd had vans. The brand was flying. We'd invested in advertising. Overnight, from over 120 people, we came down to less than 20 people. I had to let over 100 people go, close down all those depots, and just survive and prove our innocence to the restaurants. It took a year, and at the end of that year, our growth rate went from 70% to 3%. And we still grew, and we survived. And we did that because of the integrity of our team and of our brand. And of course, we put that behind us, put our foot on the accelerator, and started growing again. We then were finally able to advertise on television. Saatchi & Saatchi produced the advertisements for us. I'm not sure if the ads are playing.
I'm not sure about this one. If one or two can be tested early.
Okay. I'll try. If it doesn't play, there'll be... But the story behind these ads is very funny. You know this whole thing about India and outsourcing? Saatchi's wanted to produce this commercial in India. And they said, we're going to go to India and shoot this great commercial for you for Cobra Beer. You're an Indian brand. And could you just sign off on the budget? Are you sitting down? $1 million. I said, what? $1 million, that's the budget to show it on TV? No, this is to make the commercial. So why is it so expensive? They said, we've got to go to India and make it. And, you know, Guinness, Stella, they all spend $1 million. You want a world-class advert, you've got to pay for it. I said, but in India, we've got a big commercial advertising industry. Bollywood makes more films than Hollywood. Why don't we use Indian resource? No, quality won't be good enough. I went out to India, found the best director, found the best production company, persuaded Saatchi's, and they made two commercials in India using Indian resource with 2 people flying out from Saatchi's for a fraction of $1 million. I don't call that outsourcing. I call that right sourcing. Win for British creativity, Saatchi & Saatchi. Win for India, Indian production. Win for Cobra Beer. And it worked brilliantly. I don't think this is going to play, but hopefully the ones later will. How many of you think you're creative? Be honest. That's less than half the class. You know something? I was told I was not creative because from my childhood. Why? Because I couldn't draw. And I was useless at art. You're not creative. That's it, simple as that. So I spent my whole childhood, my whole youth, thinking I was not creative. And I realized the most important skill in business is the ability to be creative. That's what it's all about. And that confidence and ability to be creative is the greatest strength. And it comes through in everything that you do. I mean, creating Cobra Beer, that's creative, yeah. But every stage of the story. When we came out with this new packaging, which you're all now very familiar with, we came up using inspiration from Roman and Greek columns where sculpture tells a story, where a frieze tells a story. No one had ever done that for a consumer product of any kind anywhere in the world. And each one of those icons stands for a stage in the story of Cobra Beer. And it's worked brilliantly well. That's I think, being creative and doing things differently. I have my 8 Ps of building a business. You study, have they done the marketing bit yet or later?
No, they haven't done this detail. They have a bit of marketing, but not this detail.
Bit of marketing, okay. 4 Ps of marketing. This is, business 101. Product, you've got to have a product. And in our case, product is a very premium product. It won 60 gold medals. It's best Indian beer ever. That's what we choose to be. You could have a product that's a budget product, value for money product. Related to that, you have to price it right. In our case, very expensive. You go on the shelves in a supermarket, you will see Cobra, Peroni, the most expensive beers there, invariably. So expensive. On the other hand, if you have we have a wine brand called General Bilimoria, which I named after my father. He never charged a royalty. And that's a premium house wine. And that's a value for money proposition. So it's got to have the appropriate place. No point having great product without distribution. We started with the Indian restaurants. Now, strategy. You will learn lots about strategy. I have a strategy that you will never learn in a business school. And it's called breakthrough strategy. And you'll hear about blue sky, blue ocean, all these terms. Breakthrough strategy. Breakthrough strategy is you zig when everyone else zags. In my case, I couldn't afford advertising. So there was no point getting Cobra listed in Tesco's and having it on the shelves in the early days because it would have just sat there. There was no one would have known about it because I wouldn't have been able to afford the fourth P, which is the promotion. So how was I going to get people to discover my product? My breakthrough strategy was this. Everyone was getting more and more hooked on Indian food. Everyone, regardless of whichever way you segment the market, A, B, C, goes to Indian restaurants. So if I can get my beer in bottles on the tables of the Indian restaurants, and I brought them in the big double-sized bottles always, because that's the authentic way beer is consumed to this day in India, is in those big 650, 660 ml bottles. I said, if I can get people to discover my product, because on the restaurant table, which other branded products are there? Think about it. The rice, do you know which brand rice you're eating? The pickles, do you know which brand pickle you're eating? But the bottle of beer, yes, there's a brand in front of you. People will discover my product. It'll spread through word of mouth. And then eventually I'll get into the supermarkets, and then I'll be able to advertise, and then I'll get into the pubs, and then I can start exporting it around the world. That is breakthrough strategy. In India, we own the only brewery in the state of Bihar. Bihar is one of the poorest states in India. People say to me, Bihar? Do you have armed guards? Have you got kidnap insurance? 6 years ago, they would not have been exaggerating. I would have needed armed guards and kidnap insurance because 6 years ago, Bihar was a pretty dangerous place. But through a new chief minister, Nitish Kumar, the state has been turned around. Crime has gone down 6 times in 6 years. And when everyone else's perceptions of Bihar were, don't go anywhere there, we took the risk and we went in there, and we've got that as our launch pad in India, breakthrough strategy. And now we're expanding around India. Next, people. Great people. And the skill is to continually hire people who are better than you are. Continually. And most people are scared of hiring people who are better than they are. Finance spelled PH. You can't do anything without the money. So, and this was a struggle. I mean, I could give you a whole talk on just raising money. That's how difficult it was throughout. Passion. Got to be passionate about what you do. And the last one, got to make a profit as well. Okay. This is important now, more and more, is not just what you do, but how you do it. The consumers are getting more and more conscious about, are you a company that's not just doing well, but also doing good? When we set up the Cobra Foundation 6 years ago, it shocked me how few British companies actually have their own charitable foundations. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage. And this is something you can do from the time you start your business. We used to do it, and we still do it every day almost now, is we give beer away for charitable events for fundraising. So that saves the charity buying the beer. It helps entertain people to raise money. And we get a profile for our product as well. So it works for us as well. I'll give you examples. House of Lords, House of Commons, a lot of competition between us. We don't refer to it as the House of Commons, we call it the other place. So tug of war, the biggest one is the tug of war. And it's a big competition. Hundreds of people come to watch it. Here's the good news. Cobra has supported it for years and years and years by giving the beer for that event. And we raise £150,000 for Macmillan's cancer every time, even in these recessionary times. So you can help do a lot of good in different ways, depending on what your business is. You can be innovative in the way that you advertise. This is a competition we had for young filmmakers, where they got to show their films on national TV. So these were bumper advertisements on either side of the commercial breaks, accompanying blockbuster films on ITV 2, 3, and 4 for 3 years. And we had our own Cobra Vision Awards, like a mini Oscars in Mayfair. And the only rule was the films could not include Cobra Beer in the film. The branding was outside without interfering with the film. And they were really creative. I mean, you just didn't know what was going to happen. This is, if you can imagine, the film's going on, you have the commercial breaks, and this is either side. This is just one example. Isn't that better than having a product shot and a jingle before, and which you see all the time? Okay, ups and downs. Great Recession. As Her Majesty the Queen said when she went to the London School of Economics after the event, all these professors, why didn't any of you see it coming? Okay, one or two people saw it coming. We didn't see it coming. And it hit us badly, very, very badly. We were overgeared. We had taken money from an aggressive hedge fund. We had taken on a very expensive management team. And we supposedly breached one of the covenants with the hedge fund, which is a gray area, badly worded, badly drafted in the contract. And they said, sell the business. And we had to sell the business in the worst possible time after Lehman's went bust. Until then, we were building value. We were sacrificing our bottom line for growth. Cobra Beer was valued at huge amounts. My own personal shares were valued at huge amounts. I raised money on those values, real millions of pounds on those values, and suddenly cash not only became king, cash became emperor. And we were forced to sell the business. And you can imagine, in 2008, 2009, winter of 2008, spring of 2009, when the world is collapsing, the worst time to sell a business. Number one acquirer was Molson Coors. Molson Coors, Canadian-American giants that had merged in 2005. They own Carling Beer here, the biggest beer brand in the UK. They own the biggest brewery in Britain in Burton-on-Trent. Coors Light, second biggest beer brand in America. You know, they were not even interested. They sent 2 junior people for the management presentation. We thought, oh well, they're not interested. And at this stage, things were starting to get very messy because everyone in that position is trying to look after themselves. And then they came back to us and said, we don't want to buy you. We actually want to do a joint venture with you. And here are the terms of the joint venture. We agreed the terms of the joint venture would included the fact that I would have to commit for 10 years. And I'm talking about something in 2009 now. 10 years, I said, yep, I don't want to sell out, I'm happy. We want 50.1, you can have 49.9. And initially I was worried about that, and then I realized actually it makes sense because the 50.1 allows them to consolidate it in their accounts, which means they treat it as their own brand, and they will always give it a priority, as opposed to being a joint venture brand. And in any case, in 10 years' time, we can buy each other out, or we can carry on forever. And I'll be the chairman. And a lot of my team would transfer across to the joint venture. The only problem was we'd have to restructure our debt. We got 90% of our creditors to agree to the restructuring of our debt. And the day before we were about to file it in court in May 2009, one of our creditors put up a statutory demand and a winding up order to close down our business. The whole joint venture was over. Molson Coors said, that's it, we're out of here. What do you do when you see everything, what is worth hundreds of millions of pounds, disappear in front of your eyes? What do you do? Adapt or die? And we went back to Molson Coors and said, look, there is only one way out of this, and we have to put the business through the worst restructuring instrument that exists called a pre-pack administration, which is meant for this. It's a last recourse, because otherwise the business will go into administration, the brand will go, the employees will go, the shareholders will go, who knows what will happen. With the pre-pack administration, they said, we'll only do it if you do it completely above board, because most people do it so quickly, no one gets a look in, the business starts the next day, and they wipe out their employees, wipe out their shareholders, and start with a clean sheet of paper. We went with Rothschilds, our bankers, we went with PricewaterhouseCoopers and approached every one of the people interested in buying Cobra Beer and said, you can buy the brand now, you can buy the business, but you'll be competing against Karan and Cobra Beer, teamed with Molson Coors as a joint venture. If you can beat their offer, anyone can have the business. At any time of the following week, I could have lost the business because anyone could have outbid the joint venture, and other people did bid. And on the 29th of May, we won the bid and we saved the business. And even then, I could have wiped out my employees by paying them statutory redundancy. I could have wiped out my shareholders. I could have wiped out my unsecured creditors, which is what everyone does. Instead, I've looked after all my shareholders and taken them with me as part of my 49.9%. I've looked after all my employees. Even my employees who haven't stayed, I've given them shares, although I may never see them again in my life. I've paid off all my secured creditors, and I've vowed to settle my unsecured creditors, so everyone will be happy. So, adapt or die. And now, the culture of both organizations is great. We're doing really well. We're very profitable, and we have shared values. And we've been advertising. We went back to basics, love curry, love Cobra. We then took the brand on to the next level of advertising. But before that, I want to emphasize, how many of you in your businesses that you said you started your business think you've started a brand? Not many? You know, even if they're B2B businesses, the brand is so important. It's not just for consumer brands. Brands are absolutely key. I mean, to this day, our most valuable asset is the Cobra brand. And Molson Coors have a way of categorizing what makes an extraordinary brand. And they have 6 boxes you have to tick. One is telling a compelling story based on an undeniable brand truth. In our case, that undeniable brand truth is a less gassy, extra smooth beer. Live by and refuse to compromise on their principles. I hope that's come across in what I've been talking to you about now. Have an instantly recognizable look. You saw the Cobra bottle with our iconic look. Deliver a unique, relevant, and consistent experience. You know something? It really bugs me with wines. You can charge £100 a bottle for a bottle of wine, and the next year it'll taste different. Oh, the vintage is different. It didn't rain as much, or whatever excuse they want to give. But it's still £100 for that bottle. Why? And with beer, it's a natural process. It's really difficult to make beer. I mean, you know, in our case, it's a very complicated recipe. We've got yeast and water, 3 varieties of hops, and malt, and maize, and rice, and wheat. And it's got to taste exactly the same every single time as a consumer, every time you have a bottle. It cannot vary. Unfair. That inspires people to become loyal brand champions. This is really, really important, that it's almost like a cult. It's almost, you will be disappointed if you go somewhere and your brand is not there. It spoils your experience. And that deliver enduring, extraordinary profits. Now, I'll conclude now with this. Steve Jobs, this amused me, that his 10 lessons of running a business. One is experts are clueless. Next one is customers cannot tell you what they want. You know, the classic story of that is Henry Ford and cars. You know, people who have said, I want a faster horse. Innovation means jumping the next curve, and this is really important. Very few companies have ever done this in history. And the analogy he used, Guy Kawasaki used here, was the people who made ice in the old days, you know, they used to go into a lake and chop up a big block of ice, bring it back in and chop it up and sell the ice. And then they started making these big ice factories that make big blocks of ice, and they chop up and sell the ice. And then, people started making refrigerators so you can have ice in your home. But the sledge guys didn't open the ice factories, and the ice factory guys didn't open the refrigerator companies. They got left behind, and they got left behind. How many companies actually stay with it and jump the curve? Apple computer, to the Mac, to the iMac, to the iPod, to the iPhone, to the iPad, to the whatever. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Biggest challenge is bring the best work from your employees. Design counts. And by the way, the designer of Apple is a Brit, Jonathan Ives. Changing your mind is a sound of intelligence. I tell the government this all the time. I told them last week as well. I say, you change your mind about taxing pasties. Now, come on, change your mind about student visas. And I quoted Steve Jobs saying, changing your mind is a sign of intelligence. They didn't quite take that well. Value does not equal price. This is very simple. It goes back to what I was talking to you earlier on. And A players, I said this to you, hire A+ players. And branding equals uniqueness plus value, that distinctiveness, that differentiation. And finally, some things need to be believed to be seen. This is one of the commercials made in India. There's no sound. Doesn't matter, you get an idea. Music's quite cool. Doesn't matter. So it would have been better with the music of the idea. This is one of the two that Saatchi said would cost us $1 million. This is our vision: to aspire and achieve against all odds with integrity. And this is, I think, almost a definition of entrepreneurship. You come up with an idea, you want to get somewhere with the idea, you have all the odds stacked against you, you have no means or little means, and you go out there and you make it happen. And you do it with integrity. And this is I don't know if this is going to show. No, we'll move on. And that's it. I'm going to stop there. I'm not going to conclude this slide, which I may read out to you later if we have the time. Thank you very much. It's been fantastic. Whenever somebody started working at Cobra, 2 or 3 months later, I'd say, "Are you happy here?" They say, "Very happy." Why? Why are you happy? More often than not, they'd say, "I'm happy here because in the previous company where I worked, I had to ask permission to do everything. I wasn't allowed to do things. Here I can come up with ideas and I can actually make them happen and I can do them quickly." And this is where I see the difference in large organizations. Say Molson Coors, my partners, they're a multi-billion-dollar company. The negative side of that is things take much longer. What we would do in 6 months, they will sometimes take a year and a half to do. And then you have, with scale, a bureaucratic atmosphere that seems to creep in. And I think the key with an entrepreneurial company is to actually allow people, give them the freedom to come up with ideas and make them happen. And also, everyone likes being part of a successful, fast-growing atmosphere. The buzz that we had was just infectious. People socialized together, it was one big family. And that is really motivating. And to this day, the people who left Cobra now and are not with a joint venture, regular reunions are organized spontaneously of the wider Cobra family. And that gives me a lot of pride. I discovered the value of both very early on. Our mentor in our early days was my partner Arjun Reddy's uncle, Keshav Reddy. He was a retired businessman who lived on the Edgware Road, had loads of experience around the world. He'd lost both his legs through diabetes. And we'd go and see him at least once a month in his study just off the Edgware Road in London. And we'd walk in there, and there would be Uncle Keshav sitting behind the desk of his study, always with a smile on his face. "Boys, how good to see you. Now, tell me your problems." "Oh, we need some more money. Oh, we need this." Oh. And he would introduce us to successful business people and say, "Go and visit them, see how they're doing things, get inspired." And we got our connection to the brewery. One day we went to see Uncle Keshav and we said, "Uncle Keshav, we want to import seafood from India." This is before I was implementing the Cobra idea. We were importing all sorts of products from India, building up to the big one. And seafood, a friend of mine was here just the other day. He left some brochures. He dug around, he couldn't find them. "I'll post them to you." Next day, in those days, post, yeah? So next day, in the post came these brochures. And I started looking through the brochures. Pal's Seafood. I said, "Wow, great. Pal's. End of the brochure, Pal's Seafood, a division of Mysore Brewery, brewers of the famous Pal's beer. Pal's, I'd been drinking in the Indian Army messes, one of the most popular beers. And I said to Arjun, "Forget the seafood, this is my beer idea." "Uncle Keshav, do you think they'll export? We don't want to do seafood anymore. Do you think they'll export beer? Because we have this beer idea which we've told you about before." And there we are, the rest is history. As luck would have it, biggest independent brewer in India. As luck would have it, the best brewmaster in India, who is still the head of production for Cobra in India today, Dr. Karyappa. As luck would have it, they'd never exported beer to India before, out of India before. As luck would have it, their biggest selling brand was a brand called Knockout, with one boxer having knocked out another boxer. No, thank you. And Pal's is the name of a dog food in England. So we're able to bring out our own brand, our most valuable asset. But it all started with our mentor. Advisors, as soon as you can, get good, credible advisors. We started working with Grant Thornton, one of the top accountants, very early on. And just the credibility of Grant Thornton's name when we were raising finance that introduced us to our first business angel was through Grant Thornton. Getting a government small firms loan guarantee scheme was through Grant Thornton. So if you can get an advisor who believes in you, their credibility helps a lot. And then you've got to embrace your advisors and make them part of your team. In terms of selling the business, you know, when we first started, this is Mahatma Gandhi saying, one of his sayings is, first they ignore you, then they attack you, and finally they accept you. And we saw that with our competitors. First they said, oh, these two young boys, what are they going to do? You know, ignored us. Suddenly we started getting to, then they started to destroy us. Then they said, oh God, they're going to be here to stay. And one of our competitors, in our early days, in our second year, offered us £250,000. And those days, £250,000. If it had been £1 million, I don't know. Bill Gates, you've heard the story how Bill Gates was desperate to sell out to IBM. And I can't remember the figure that he's quoted publicly, he would have accepted to sell out to IBM in the early days. So it's all relative. 6 years ago, one of the biggest pros in the world offered to strategically invest and buy out. What if I'd taken that deal then? I wouldn't have gone through the hardships that I went through nearly 4 years ago. On the other hand, I went through the hardships, and here I am partners with one of the biggest pros in the world, highly profitable, and in 6 years' time, who knows how big things will be. Serial entrepreneurs are people who will keep starting something 2, 3, 4, 5 years, sell it, start the next one, sell, start the next one. They're very successful doing that as well. I know a lot of people who earn that. It's horses for courses. It's what about you as an individual? It goes back to that question I asked earlier on. What do you want to do? To me, my dream is to make Cobra a global beer brand. I've achieved the household name here in the UK. It is a household name in the UK. I believe I can do that around the world, and I've got a long way to go to do that. And I just love it. I love the brand. People say, do you drink Cobra? Of course I do. Do you like Cobra? I love the stuff. What annoys me is how people can drink all those other awful beers. Not all beers are awful, but, you know, so I love it. I've spoken to so many fellow entrepreneurs, and they say one of the distinguishing characteristics of entrepreneurs is that they have the guts, the successful ones have the guts to stick it out when others would give up. It's that Churchill, never give up, never ever give up. Now you've got to be realistic as well. In the early days, we had lots of ideas. We wanted to import towels because we said towels from Bombay Dyeing, the biggest towel manufacturer in India, household name in India. You know, we researched the market. When we got the towels in, we realized we couldn't compete in those days with Portugal, and we couldn't compete with other countries. Our towels were not as good, and they were not as good value. So there would have been no point continuing to try and sell those towels and banging your head against a brick wall. But when you've got an idea that you really believe is going to work, and you've proven it, and you know it's going to work, then you want to see it through when everyone else tells you not to, and everyone else tells you to give up. And it's that belief and passion and the guts to just stick it through, I think, that sets apart. And of course you need support. In my case, in the early days, I had my partner to support me. I've had people, one of my longest standing employees has been with me since, it's coming up to 20 years this year. Almost from day one, he stood by me through everything. My wife, the support that she gave me through everything was absolutely amazing, especially these hard times we went through 4 years ago. If she hadn't been by my side and supported me, I don't think I could have got through it. So your family, your employees, but most importantly, your belief in yourself and the guts to carry on. With a brand, you can try and take it across different products. So for example, when we started wine, we said to have a beer brand and the wine brand is the same. We just didn't think it would work. Some brands can be translated. So the Virgin brand goes across mobile phones, it goes across aircraft, airlines, music. It can translate, but I don't think all brands can do that. And I think Kingfisher tried to start an airline in India, and it was good at promoting the beer, but so it doesn't always work. So we've been pretty focused with the brand and with beer. But it doesn't stop brands from trying to go into other areas. We toyed with the idea a lot, Cobra Rice, Cobra Pickles, Cobra, but we said focus beer. This goes back to what Shai was saying. if Molson Coors could not believe when we started working together as a joint venture, the way that our Indian restaurant team worked, it was on relationships. And our whole team know the owners of every one of those restaurants. You know, we are now in 98% of all the Indian restaurants that are licensed in the UK. There are only just over 100 who don't sell Cobra. I'll get them one day. But, you know, the relationships, you ask my team, they know everyone there, and it's all built on those relationships. And when we had that boycott situation, it was the relationships that we built that got us through the boycott. And to this day, they are so supportive of us. We're always appreciative of them. Without the Indian restaurants, we wouldn't be where we are today. And they taught me my first lesson, by the way. We used to go into the Indian restaurants and say, take our beer. They'd say, forget it. We're not interested in this beer. We've got too many beers anyway. I said, come on, try it. It's delicious, extra smooth. Sorry, we don't drink. 2/3 of the Indian restaurants are actually owned and run by Bangladeshis. Muslims, for religious reasons, they don't drink. The other 1/3 Pakistanis, Muslims, they don't drink. A lot of Indians, Muslims don't drink. Sri Lankans, everything. What do you do? You know, they said, it doesn't matter that we don't drink. It's our customers that matter. This beer is so fantastic. We'll take 2 bottles as a sample. We'll try it with our regulars. If our regulars like it, we'll put it in our first sort of our wider customers like it. We will reorder your beer. And they gave me that chance from day one. And I will never forget that. And I will always be grateful to the restaurants and the strong relationships that we have with them. And this worries me, that I think that you need to use the most of the power of technology in communicating now, which we do, but I still don't think there's any shortcut to those relationships. Every time I've tried to solve any major issue, strike any major deal, the best way I've done that is to get people around a table and face to face to sort that out. You cannot achieve it on a conference call, you cannot achieve it on a video conference, you cannot achieve it by email. The best way to do it, always, is that human relation. And I think we've gone too far the other way, where people don't communicate enough. And I think that relationship-based way of doing business in total, not just with your customers, with everyone. Somebody asked me about advisors. Embracing your advisors is not, I'm the client, you're the provider. You're part of my team. That is so, so crucial.